Some other cultures knew a great deal about navigation.
Forged the image of the Red Baron, an image so potent that replicas of his aircraft are built and flown today. Manfred von Richthofen was the most successful air ace of the Great War, with 80 victories. When he died, he was only 25. Today, enthusiasts still collect mementos and publish books about him. But it's not all hero worship.
Now, looking back, we forget the horrors of the war. We forget that he was, in fact, to all intents and purposes, a hired killer, something he excelled at. What we tend to remember is the fact that he was a fighter pilot, a man who was imbued with almost a legendary quality. The propaganda aspects built this up, or worked on this basis, and built him up into a superhero. And it's a legend which has lasted remarkably well. So today, many people still know of the Red Baron.
Richthofen was born in 1892 into the German aristocracy. At the age of 11, he was sent to cadet school in Berlin.
His autobiography makes it quite clear that he disliked it intensely. It was a case of almost being forced into a military background, something he wouldn't have chosen himself. The hunting aspect also came out here because the country squire, the hunting, and went with the style of life. And from a very early age, he had a gun in hand and would shoot anything in sight.
After graduating from military academy, Richthofen was commissioned as a cavalryman. He went to war on horseback in August 1914. But military deadlock was reached on the Western Front. Trench warfare was static, and it gave little scope for his ambitions, as he complained in a letter home.
We are now in and out of the trenches like the infantry. We seldom, if ever, ride. I should have liked very much to have got the Iron Cross, first class, but there is no opportunity here.
In the First World War, cavalry's traditional role of reconnaissance was given to the infant air service. Before the war, military authorities on both sides had paid little attention to the potential of aviation. When fighting began, the value of an eye and a camera in the sky soon became apparent. Troop movements could be monitored and artillery fire observed as never before. To Richthofen, it seemed a logical move to exchange his mount for the observer's seat in an aircraft. In 1915, observers were usually in charge of the aircraft. The pilots, often NCOs, were looked on as mere chauffeurs. As Richthofen joined the air service, aircraft were being fitted with machine guns to shoot down enemy observation flights. Although he managed to bring down one British machine, his victory received no official recognition. The snub spurred him to train as a pilot himself. Flying the new single-seater fighters, as he hoped to do, he would not then be denied credit for his successes. In September 1916, Richthofen joined the squadron commanded by Oswald Boelcke, a leading German ace. Boelcke's rules of aerial combat, strictly applied, brought instant success for his flyers.
Whatever Boelcke told us was taken as gospel. We knew that in the last few days he had shot down at least one Englishman a day, and many times two in a single morning. It was a wonderful time for our squadron. The spirit of our leader spread to his pupils. We could trust blindly his leadership.
The Royal Flying Corps learned Boelcke's lessons the hard way. More and more pilots died. Soon instructional diagrams were produced to warn British flyers to beware of the Hun in the sun, to avoid being decoyed by an apparently lone aircraft, and to adopt German tactics by attacking from the enemy's blind spot.
Looking at a letter I wrote home from France in those days, one was dealing only with German airplanes. You didn't think of the airplane being flown by a pilot, at least I didn't. And although we were flying in formation, you invariably broke up the formation immediately you came across enemy aircraft. And as I've said, the airplane, you didn't feel that it was being flown by a man. It was the airplane you were after. And one virtually, I've said in my letters, went a bit mad, and you know, you chased around and Hun was flying against you, and you could hear the whine of his bullets or the cack-cack-cack of the guns going. Sometimes they were your own, or very slow our guns seemed to be firing in those days. The Vickers gun, which I had firing forward through the propeller with a Constantinesco gear so that it didn't hit the prop, that was very, very slow. I remember it seemed to go pop, 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 pop. Nothing like the guns in this last war, of course.
Richthofen was Boelcke's most successful pupil. He was given command of his own squadron after shooting down 15 British aircrafts in the last 3 months of 1916.
He wasn't an exceptionally good pilot. He wasn't an aerobatic pilot by any means. In fact, he frowned upon aerobatics. He said he'd be put to a disadvantage in a combat. But he managed to position his plane using it as a gun platform, which is how he saw it. He didn't see it as an airplane as such, but as a means of delivering the bullets to the target, as a hunter would do, with a rifle or whatever. He's very cautious by nature, and he would never attack if he was in a disadvantage.
Early in the war, I found that when I downed an Englishman, my hunting passion was quenched for the time being. I seldom tried to shoot down 2 Englishmen, one right after another. If one fell, I had the feeling of absolute satisfaction. Only much later did I overcome that and also become a shooter.
Richthofen gloried in his victories. He was even known to land beside the wreck of a victim to pick up a memento.
It was a natural evolution from his childhood days, where as a hunter he would collect the heads or the feet of the animals he killed and would mount them stuffed in his own home. My personal belief is that he carried on with this as a fighter pilot, that his victims were the hunted. He would take bits of fabric or machine guns and mount them around his quarters in the same way as he had done before the war with animals. The collection of cups was also a means of doing this, recording each victim, because some of the planes he couldn't find. They crashed behind enemy lines, and so there's no souvenirs to be gained from them. So the cups, one each for the 60, were just his own personal way of remembering each victim.
For flyers of both sides during the First World War, the aerial environment was almost as hostile as enemy aircraft. Aviation was in its infancy. Airplanes were primitive.
In those days, the aeroplane was underpowered, and so one had to fly the aeroplane meticulously, otherwise you stalled or lost control. And then, of course, in the First War, if you were up against the enemy, you were cold meat, of course, if you were out of control. But you see, the aeroplane was very elementary. Open cockpits, no parachutes, no self-sealing tanks, no oxygen. And we were flying at great altitudes. I suppose we used to cross the lines at about 15,000 and gradually climb a bit more while we were doing our offensive patrols, climb up a bit higher. But it was intensely cold. It is impossible to recapture the feeling. One lost all feeling in one's hands and one's feet, for instance. It was so bitterly cold. But that was, of course, due to the altitude, as well as open cockpits and, of course, no heating in the aeroplane of any kind.
Richthofen's trademark, the all-red aeroplane, became a personal challenge to the enemy.
The nice thing about being a fighter pilot is that one does not depend solely on artificial means, but rather the decisive factor in victory is simply personal courage. The chances for victory also depend on which opponent one faces. The sneaky Frenchman or those plucky fellows, the Englishmen. The Frenchman flinches, the Englishman seldom does. One can often speak of stupidity here. Indeed, the English show this as pluck and daring.
As his score rose, Richthofen was given the Blue Max, Germany's highest award for bravery. With official encouragement, the press splashed his exploits. A hero was in the making.
In modern day